Hey guys, hey, it's good to be back for another lesson. And we've been going through how normal cells divide. Now we're going to take a look at special kind of cells, reproductive cells, and they divide as well. And what you'll see is different is the whole purpose of producing reproductive cells is making cells with half the chromosomes so they can combine with other cells. I want to start off with a video from Bill Nye. So if you will, follow along as we watch this one.
The first answer was provided in 1883 by Belgian zoologist Edward van Beneden. Van Beneden was studying a species of roundworm when he discovered that nearly all of its cells contained 4 chromosomes. The only exceptions were the roundworm's sex cells, the male sperm and the female egg. These cells had only 2 chromosomes. Van Beneden observed that once 2 of the sex cells came together, a full set of 4 chromosomes appeared in the fertilized egg. But just why the sex cells had only half the number of chromosomes compared to all the other cells was still a mystery. Then in 1887, German biologist August Weismann entered the picture.
He knew about the work of Van Beneden, who had shown that the sperm and the egg bring in equal numbers of chromosomes. But Van Beneden's work had not really worked out the details of how the chromosomes were reduced in number.
He saw them go in half, and he saw them recombine.
He saw that the sperm and the egg brought in half the number of chromosomes as the body cell, but he didn't really know how they got rid of the half that they got rid of. So Weismann discussed how this might happen from a theoretical standpoint. And he said, well, what you could have would be that either every one of the chromosomes would just split in half, and half would go off one way and half would go another way, or you could have it more complicated, that the chromosomes could pair, and then instead of splitting, they just separate again.
After years of studying the behavior of chromosomes, Weismann determined that at some point a developing organism signals its sex cells to divide their number of chromosomes in half. Weismann called this very special form of cell division meiosis.
I think they will look back and see this as the golden age of biology, because, let's say, for 200 years, between 1800 and 2000, we went from not knowing what distinguished a stone from a frog. And now we know the difference between a stone and a frog.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. So that, in a real sense, we've answered the old philosophical question, what is life? Maybe not to everybody's satisfaction, but we're well on the way.
So, big discovery there, looking closely at these reproductive cells, and found out that they don't have half the chromosomes. And so that was the discovery of meiosis. And really the whole point of this kind of cell division is to make these reproductive cells. And so we're going to compare mitosis, meiosis, and see the difference. Here's some of the details about it. Instead of 2 identical cells, you get 4 cells, and they each have half the chromosomes, and they are each genetically different DNA. And what you're going to find is, whether you're talking about plants, animals, humans, they still use those same words, egg and sperm cells. So it seems kind of strange to talk about trees and sperm cell, but that's what they do, and that's how biologists describe these male reproductive cells, female reproductive cells. So I know I showed you a diagram of mitosis where when you had cells A and B, they divided into 2 identical cells, A and B. Well, in this case, there's one extra step, so you end up with 4 cells, and each one is unique. Now, in this case, 2 of them are A, 2 of them are B, but when there's more chromosomes, you're going to get most likely 4 completely different cells. So that's just a visual difference when you compare that to mitosis. If we look at this another way, again with pictures and instead of letters, you can see that we begin with one cell here with duplicate chromosomes, and they will get copied, divide again. So now you end up with 4 different cells. You can see they're all unique in some way, and that's really the purpose of meiosis. And then these, one of these reproductive cells will combine with another reproductive cell, and you'll get a unique combination. DNA is going to be different than both parents, and that's really the point of making this kind of division, is to make these reproductive cells. Here's another diagram of this, and what it's showing is that across the top here is that it begins really with mitosis. So cells will divide. There's just a second division. So they're calling this telophase 1, but then you go to prophase 2, metaphase 2, anaphase 2. So those stages of division just have a second step, and the chromosomes get divided up, and there's different ways that they can divide up, but really what we need to know, start to finish, you end up with 4 cells that came from 1, and they're all unique. Another way of looking at here, they're calling the original cell 2N, and let me get back here, for mitosis, you get 2 identical cells with 2N, but for meiosis, you get 4 cells, and they only have half the number of chromosomes, so you get 1N, and that's what really makes it different. So another way of seeing that. It's a pretty good diagram to show you that. For humans, we have 46 chromosomes, or you could say 23 pair of chromosomes. So you're seeing each chromosome here listed, and they've identified what genes are on a lot of these chromosomes. And look down here at the bottom, the X and the Y chromosome, when those pair up, you either get an X or a Y, and it turns out for females it looks more like an X. For males it ends up being a Y chromosome, and that's really what determines male or female. So they call those something different, sex chromosomes, versus all the rest of the chromosomes are called autosomes. So they do make a distinction. That would be with the example of humans. And you probably heard something about that in health class with Mr. McClinic. So another diagram showing meiosis here for reproductive cells. You start with 1. You make a copy of those chromosomes. They split into 2, and then they divide one more time. So you have 4 cells, all unique, and they have half the chromosomes, and they call that haploid. Half. A lot of definitions here you probably don't know yet, but they call that a haploid cell. In mitosis, here at the bottom, you end up with 2 cells, and they are identical, and they're calling those diploid cells because they have the full set of chromosomes, both pairs of chromosomes. So a real quick comparison of these two, if you could follow along, when we talk about mitosis, we could say, that's for normal cells. And maybe you could predict that meiosis, that's not for normal cells, that's for reproductive cells. Okay? In mitosis, we start with 1 cell, we end up with 2. For meiosis, we start with 1 cell, we end up with 4. And that's a big distinction. When you compare cells, mother cell to daughter cells, they are identical, same DNA. But when you compare the beginning cell to the 4 that are made in meiosis, they all have different DNA. If you compare the number of chromosomes, full amount, we call a diploid. If you look at meiosis, they end up with half of the chromosomes. And again, the whole reason to make cells with half the chromosomes is so that they can combine with another reproductive cell. And then the two halves come together to make the whole. So I hope that makes sense to you. And as far as cells, they call this reproduction. So mitosis, they call this asexual reproduction because one cell divides into two all on its own. Meiosis, the whole purpose of that is to produce reproductive cells. So they call this preparation for sexual reproduction. So that's the difference. I hope that makes sense. If not, we'll try some other things to help you to figure that out. But hope you guys have a good evening or good morning, whenever it is you're watching this, and we'll talk to you later.